Life was going to be turned upside down, and their provocations were going to bring shame on their family.
And she was buried on Friday, 6th of November 1840. 16 days after she had died.
13 years of age, homeless, vulnerable and hungry. But sadly, he was a rogue and his intentions were not all that honourable. Boys and girls were separated, siblings were forced apart, and every one of an age that can work were often forced to undertake mindless, grueling jobs like oakum picking.
Lydia sadly wasn't actually buried in this particular church, and this probably is where she should have been. There was a little bit of a sinister tale and a little bit of a very sad end to her life. Now I've actually got some flowers for Lydia. I don't really have anywhere to leave them for her because there is no grave. There's just this place here. This being the last place she would have known for the last 2 years of her life. So I guess I have to leave them here.
Lydia had been glaring up towards the peeling paint on the ceiling for over an hour. Her glassy eyes were deep and thoughtful. She knew her time was near. "Are you in any pain?" said a voice beside her. She didn't glance towards the voice, just carried on staring into the void above her. But through her cracked, dry lips, she spoke with a dry voice. "There is only one pain that burdens me, one that I often feel. It's a pain that cannot be fixed, but caused by the absence of those that should be here." Those were the last words that Lydia Mumford spoke, as she passed away from this world and into the next. Her death marked the end of a near 100-year tragedy that had befallen 3 generations of women in her family history, including her mother and grandmother. Names now just scribbled onto old parish records and a handful of documents. Their lives and bodies now into dust. They were the Mayhew girls. Lydia Mumford, who was also known as Lydia Mayhew, is my 3 times great-grandmother, the illegitimate daughter of a haybinder and brought up solely by her mother Sophia, a silk winder of Bocking, Essex. Lydia's story is long, painful, sad and arduous. But to really appreciate her story and to understand how poverty-stricken she really was, we must try and understand her parents and grandparents, as her misfortune began long before she was born. The first of the Mayhew girls in this story is Sophia Mayhew, the elder, who was baptised on the 26th of March 1779 at St Michael's Parish Church in Ockhold, Suffolk. She was the second eldest of 4 children and the only daughter of William and Anne Mayhew. The Mayhews were an old Suffolk family of yeomanry farmers, with a coat of arms recorded in the heraldic crests of Suffolk families. So her family name had good standing in her community. The 18th and 19th century was very much influenced by social standing, classes and, of course, religion. King George III was Britain's monarch at the time, and Georgian England was very strict in a religious sense. It also was a great time of unemployment and abject poverty. The divide between rich and poor was extreme, and the poverty-stricken were often treated with discontent and faced awful living conditions. Those who broke the law often faced execution, of which over 200 offences were punishable by death. Women had no rights at all. A woman and her fortune became her husband's property when they married, and he had almost unlimited power over her. Many marriages were arranged between families where the bride had little to say in the choice of her husband. Sometimes love or affection grew, but when love didn't flourish, some husbands were cruel. Divorce was almost unheard of, and society didn't think badly of a man who found love elsewhere, whilst infidelity in women might cause her to be cast out of society and to lose her children. The lives of the Mayhew girls really do symbolise that sad truth of Georgian life, and it fared no better during the Victorian era. Those girls searched for love, true love, but sadly they found none, only the harsh reality of a fallen woman. Life was going to be turned upside down, and their provocations were going to bring shame on their family. It was 20th of June 1804, Ockhold Parish, Suffolk. 25-year-old Sophia Mayhew, my 5 times great-grandmother, begs the parish council for help with maintenance for her bastard child, named Sophia like her mother. Sophia the elder had fallen for a dashing 20-year-old, James Raga of Bedingfield. Although younger than Sophia, he outranked her socially and was a descendant of the lustrous Burlingham and Howard families of Suffolk and Norfolk. Class made no difference to payment. 1 shilling weekly to be paid by James for the upkeep of his illegitimate bastard child. Sophia's name was now tainted and her baby daughter shunned. Only her living, breathing mother would keep her safe. Time would not be kind to this baby. Life will be hard and comparatively short. This dark cloud over her would reverberate down the generations. So how did Georgian England treat unmarried mothers? I guess it all fell down to class differences. Working class families may have seen an illegitimate child as a future set of hands to work and earn. Middle and upper class hierarchy were more ashamed of an illegitimate child, especially if the lover refused to make an honest woman of her. Sophia was middle class, and although her own lineage held some good standing stock, her lover's ancestry was much grander. James Raga was probably forbidden to marry Sophia, or he was still too young, foolish even. Georgian 20-year-olds are probably not much different to 20-year-olds today. A different time period makes no difference to maturity, only for stricter expectations bestowed on them. Henry VIII's juvenile court, for instance, was a ruckus affair. What happened to James Raga is a bit of a mystery. He disappears from the records shortly after his daughter was born and the bastardy order was made. Any love that existed between James and Sophia the elder must have been short-lived. In some way it must have broken her. It certainly tainted her character, and she certainly would have been shunned in her community. Eventually Sophia the elder took salvation in the arms of another, a marriage most likely arranged, and one that was most likely cruel. Ockhold Parish, Suffolk, 1808. His name was Zachariah Gooderham, an agricultural labourer and a social step down from her middle class background. Baby Sophia Mayhew, although warmly cared for by her mother, was treated very differently from her forthcoming half-siblings and stepfather, which became clear as day on the 19th of May 1817, when her mother could no longer protect her. The young Sophia's cruel and harsh treatment by her stepfather, Zachariah Gooderham, became absolute on the morning of 19th of May 1817. Sophia the elder had gone into labour and the birth did not fare well. a new baby girl was brought into the world as the mother slipped away from it. Sophia had died as a result of complications through childbirth. Without haste, she was buried that same day. Her child baptized alongside the funeral. Sophia the younger was afraid. Her mother had always been her protector, but now she was gone. She was just 13 years old, just a child. Suddenly she heard the new name given to the baby. To her shock, she was named Sophia, as if the child were her replacement. Two living siblings sharing a name was not common practice in Georgian England. Usually one has to die. It meant only one thing. 13-year-old Sophia was about to be sent away, cast out of her home in the pouring rain to fend for herself. She was a bastard, the prodigy of a dashing, foolish young man whom the now dead Sophia loved. Zachariah hated her for that. With just the clothes on her back and very little in coin, the door to her home closed forever. Young Sophia, cold, afraid, and unsure of the world that lay out before her, set forth on a journey south. She must find shelter, work, food, a new place to call home. Somehow she will find the strength within. Somehow she will find it.
Welcome to St Mary's Church in Bocking, Essex. It's actually the second time I've visited this church in the last couple of weeks, and I have to say it's certainly a very beautiful church. Now, my main reason for visiting this incredible historical place of worship is because in these grounds lies the remains of my fourth great-grandmother, Sophia Mayhew. Now, sadly, Sophia Mayhew, my fourth great-grandmother, died Wednesday 21st of October 1840, aged just 36 years old. She died of consumption, which was very common in the 19th century. 36 years old. 36, it's very young. And sadly she left behind her only child, 12-year-old Lydia Mumford, my 3 times great-grandmother. Must have been traumatic, losing the only parent you have at such a young age. And she was buried on Friday, 6th of November 1840, 16 days after she had died. I guess it took 16 days to raise the funds for her burial, even though she would have had a pauper's funeral and buried without a headstone. Probably buried in an unmarked grave. And her death certificate was signed by an Esther Humphrey, who I presume was probably one of her close friends. They both worked as silk winders in the nearby silk factory. She had no partner. Her own mother had died when she was very young. Her father had died, and she left behind just one small child. Now, it's been over 180 years since Sophia's death, and it's probably been that long before anybody left any flowers for her. Now I don't know where in this graveyard Sophia is buried, but here is a beautiful view of the church, and I'm going to leave the flowers. And not only that, but I've actually had this little tiny plaque made for the two Sophias and for Lydia Mumford, so for my 3 times great grandmother, my 4th and my 5th, my 3 English roses, the Mayhew girls in beloved memory. We are just stars in our family's constellation. I'm not actually going to, I'm going to leave this here shortly, but I'm going to actually take this home with me, and this little plaque's I'm gonna find a beautiful space in my garden for this little plaque. It's just somewhere I can lay a few roses down every now and again for these 3 incredible women. But for now, for the very first time, this is for Sophia. For Sophia Mayhew, born in 1805 and died in 1840, aged just 36. Okay, I'm going to leave the roses here for Sophia Mayhew. Well, for all 3 girls, to be honest with you. For both of the Sophias and for Lydia as well. So Lydia being my 3 times great grandmother, Sophia the younger being my 4th, and Sophia the elder being my 5th great grandmother. 3 incredible girls who faced incredible odds in their lives and lived very, very sad existences and never found love. The men that were supposed to have protected them in their lives were just not there for them, and they were abandoned. They were abandoned as well as their children, and I find that heartbreaking. I find it incredible that anyone would do such a thing. And in those particular times, it must have been extremely difficult. No financial help, family turning away from you, religion against you. Awful times. Those 3 girls are certainly in my memory and in my heart. In beloved memory of the Mayhew girls. In my mind, in my existence, in my heart. 3 very beautiful English roses. Okay, I'm going to leave the flowers here. The florist was actually extremely kind, and she left and she gave me this for the roses, so they would last as long as possible. So I'm going to do that and put the roses in here.
Sophia Mayhew, the younger, my 4th great-grandmother, illegitimate, unloved, 13 years of age, homeless, vulnerable and hungry, began her long journey south in search of work and accommodation. From Occult, Suffolk to Bocking, Essex she walked, some 50 miles on foot, passing through Stowmarket, Sudbury and Halstead, before her final arrival in Braintree. It's hard to imagine a 13-year-old cast out in the world and arriving alone in a strange town. How did Sophia manage? How long did she live without a home? These questions are lost with time, but I can imagine her ordeal was unkind and harrowing. Braintree proved its worth, and young Sophia was able to secure work in nearby Bocking as a silk winder, an industry which flourished in the region during the Georgian and Victorian times. Was life going to get better for Sophia, or was his purgatory going to get worse?
Now, the church in St Mary's in Bocking, Essex is actually very beautiful inside, and I'm going to show you that now. Well, both Jana and I are going to show you when we had a little look around a couple of weeks ago. We came here and we did some filming inside the church, and the stained glass windows are stunning, and I am very fond of stained glass windows, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys at home. So here we go. Enjoy this part of the video as Jana and I take you around this stunning, beautiful, incredible church. And I'm going to be taking a little look at the church walls as well, because the church walls, they look like a castle. Like castle walls all the way around the church. That's what it looks like to me. Very beautiful. So this is the inside. Now, the actual gravestones have actually been moved, and they've been moved to the far side of that wall over there. So they've cleared the church grounds to allow, I suppose, more green space. And these are the incredible walls of St Mary's churchyard, and they look even better from the other side. So I'm going to take you down there and we'll have a quick look before we go inside of the church. How stunning these walls are, everybody. And the walls also include what looks like to me some Roman tile, and parts of it looks like it's been rebuilt and fixed. And it goes all the way around. Down here along the outside. Stunning. Okay everybody, let's have a little look inside the church, and hope you enjoyed that part of the video.
The silk mill in Bocking, Essex was one of three owned by Samuel Courtauld. The mill was newly opened when Sophia Mayhew, my 4th grade grandmother, arrived in Braintree, and Bocking aged 13. She had been made homeless and cast out by her stepfather following the death of her mother through childbirth. She was an unwanted child, and yet Sophia was both resilient and pragmatic and found work quickly as a silk winder. She also secured accommodation in Church Street, Bocking, a home she remained in until the day she died. 13 years old, and yet she would have worked 6 days a week and as many as 12 hours a day. Hard going for someone so young. But I guess our ancestors were made of tougher stuff than us. Life must have been pretty lonely at first, but I can imagine she made friends quickly. For a woman living alone in Georgian England, it would have been easy to fall victim to less savoury characters. James Mumford, a local farm labourer, was one such rogue. Most of his family had at least 1 or 2 visits to the local magistrate's court, and James was no exception. He interchanged his surname a few times too, sometimes Mumford and sometimes Mountford. James Mumford and Sophia Mayhew. It could have been a promising union, but sadly the Mayhew girls were never that good at choosing a good man. I hope he was worth it, and I hope she loved for a brief time, as poor old Sophia was about to make her life a lot more awkward. Sophia the younger most likely met James Mumford sometime around the year 1826. He was about 5 years younger than her, which coincidentally was the same age between her mother and wayward father. So sadly, history seemingly was repeating itself. Maybe there was some poor Mayhew curse on those girls, and they didn't seem to have much luck finding a loving, lasting relationship. I'm sure she loved him. I'm sure she loved him dearly, but sadly he was a rogue and his intentions were not all that honourable. It's difficult to tell how long those two remained together, as there is no bastardy paper for the birth of their child, which makes me think that their relationship lasted for some time, even if it was classed as sinful during that period of history. His character, of course, was questionable, and I can also imagine that Sophia must have suffered from anxiety or depression, which must have made their relationship difficult. She was hard-working though, and I can imagine that every penny she earned was spent on just living and every day that came. James and Sophia became parents in 1828, and the child was baptised Lydia on the 10th of September 1828 at St Mary the Virgin, Bocking, Essex. The baby took her father's surname Mumford, although in truth she was still a Mayhew, as her parents were unmarried. It wasn't long afterwards, maybe 4 or 5 years, that James Mumford walked away from his relationship with Sophia and his daughter Lydia. He returned home to his place of birth in nearby Fifield and began a new relationship with a Jane Blowes. Those two went on to have 6 children but were never married, and James often found himself in court on at least 5 occasions, always for larceny, of which he served at least 2 sentences. He never saw Sophia again, or his daughter for that matter. It must have been painfully difficult for Sophia Mayhew to bring up a young child and hold down a job that took up so much time and energy. This now very small family continued to reside in Church Street, Bocking. That was until tragedy struck. Sophia had developed a painful cough that would cause huge amounts of pain in her chest and with breathing. She was coughing blood, losing weight, suffered fatigue and night sweats, and eventually she succumbed to the worst. And whilst dying in her bed, she was comforted by her daughter Lydia and good friend Esther Humphrey, who was a 68-year-old silk winder who lived just a couple of streets away from Sophia. Lydia was just 12 years old when her mother sadly died from consumption, as it was known in the early 19th century, called so because you pretty much wasted away. Consumption would later be known as tuberculosis. Sophia Mayhew died on the 21st of October 1840 at her home in Church Street. She was buried 16 days later in a pauper's grave. No marker, no remembrance, and only a few in attendance, including her young daughter and good friend Esther. Lydia was now alone. Lydia's story is a lot more complicated than her mother's and grandmother's, and out of the three of them, her life was by far the hardest and most traumatic. Lydia suffered from extreme poverty and extreme shame, illegitimacy being the first of them. She was also employed as a charwoman, and so would have been employed as a house cleaner, a job she may have secured shortly after her mother's death. A lot of wealthy households took in young, desolate girls and used them for duties around the home. Not easy duties either, and long grueling hours, but it did mean she had at least a bed to sleep in, as a job often came with accommodation within the home you were employed. Not always staff rooms either, they sometimes slept on the floor in the kitchen. It really depended on how lucky you were with the position you were employed in. Lydia doesn't actually appear in the 1841 census, so her employees didn't record her, which makes me think they didn't treat her too kindly. But by at least 1846, she met a dashing young man called Charles Gray, an agricultural labourer of Bocking, Essex. Charles was the eldest son and second eldest of 8 children, born to Richard and Charlotte Gray. The family were a hard-working and respected family, with Charles being the 8th great-grandson of Sir Ralph Gray of Chillingham Castle, of which I'm sure the family may have been aware of, even 8 generations down the line. The relationship that Charles and Lydia had did not fare well, and was close to breaking point even after the birth of their first son, Charles Mumford, who was christened on the 28th of February 1848 in St Mary the Virgin, Bocking. I can imagine that Charles had a lot of pressure from his parents, as the couple were unmarried and not something the Gray family approved of or did. Plus Lydia's history was certainly questionable and most likely frowned upon. For a brief moment, the family actually separated, which resulted in Charles being hauled into court for maintenance of his illegitimate son Charles. He was shamed in the local newspapers for this too, which must have put even more pressure and strain on an already crumbling relationship. How Charles and Lydia felt for each other has sadly been lost to history, but I can imagine they did love each other. Charles continued his relationship with Lydia Mumford for a further 8 years, and the couple went on to have 5 children, including my 2 times great-grandmother, Mary Ann Mumford, who was born in 1854. Sadly, 3 of the children may not have reached adulthood, as a death is recorded for one of the children in 1853, and 2 of the other children disappeared from the records. The relationship sadly broke down in 1856, and Charles Gray moved away from Bocking that same year, relocating to Maldon, Essex, where he met and married an Esther Ann Sorrell on the 19th of September 1857. They went on to have a staggering 9 children together. I think the relationship breakdown fell very hard on Lydia. I have no doubt it pretty much broke her. Lydia also fell into deep poverty around this time and eventually lost her home. She was forced to do the unimaginable and in her despair took her surviving children to Bocking Workhouse and placed them in their care. Care is the wrong word, of course, for a workhouse, as it was far from a caring place. Boys and girls were separated, siblings were forced apart, and everyone of an age that can work were often forced to undertake mindless, grueling jobs like oakum picking, which was teasing out the fibres from old ropes, which was very hard on the fingers. These loose fibres were often sold to shipbuilders for mixing with tar to seal the lining of a wooden craft. Children did have some schooling, but not very much, and girls were often made to undertake needlework, cleaning and cooking in preparation for a job as a maid once they reached the age of 14. The two children that Lydia Mumford placed in Bocking Workhouse were the second eldest son, Arthur Mumford, who was born in 1850, and her only daughter, Mary Ann Mumford, born in 1854. Mary was most likely aged 4 or 5, and Arthur aged 6 or 7. Arthur never came out of the workhouse, as he disappeared from the records in 1861. A sad truth about British workhouses in the Victorian period is that the bodies of those that died, left unclaimed, were often sold to medical schools for dissection. Arthur's body, being aged only about 11, would have been highly sought after by medical schools, and payment for his body would have been profitable. There was money to be made from the poor, not only in the work they did, but a good profit in their dead corpse too. It was completely legal, and sadly a piece of British history that has been whitewashed from the history books. Arthur never was given a burial, and he was treated no differently than a common criminal, with his crime being abject poverty. Whilst Lydia's children wasted away in Bocking Workhouse, she actually followed Charles Gray to Maldon, although it was in vain, and her desperation and sadness only pushed him further away from her. He eventually moved again, then again and again, finally settling in Reading, at least 100 miles away. Lydia was abandoned in Maldon, although she took comfort in a local Maldon man named Samuel Dennis, who was 7 years older. He was a butcher during his younger years and resided in Maldon High Street, before becoming a bricklayer in later years and eventually living in Church Street, in a residence close to the parish church. Samuel and Lydia remained together for at least 4 years, and the relationship had issue: 2 children born in 1858 and the last in 1862. Samuel eventually left Lydia and abandoned her alongside his 2 children. He fled to East Grinstead, Sussex, and married a Phyllis Wickenden there in 1864. Lydia never saw Samuel again, as he remained in East Grinstead and died there in 1886. By 1869, Lydia's surviving daughter, still living alone in Bocking Workhouse, was old enough to procure a job for herself, as she was 14 years of age by this point. Those cleaning, cooking and needlework jobs she undertook in the workhouse came handy, as by 1869 she was in the employment of a William Wood Janes, a man she would eventually marry too. He was aged 41 and Mary aged 24 when they married at Maldon Register Office in 1878. Lydia became estranged from her family during those last years of her life. She lived for a while in Wants Road, Maldon, during the 1870s, and finally in Mill Road. Whether she had any dealings with her family is unclear. I can imagine they found it hard to forgive her for abandoning them at such a young age in the workhouse and for acting out her life in a very despairing way. Although in truth, she was no more than a victim of generations of heartbreak that reverberated down the years and destroying every generation in its wake. She was a lost soul, a woman who had nothing her entire life.
Just here on Mill Road is where Lydia lived in the 1880s. So she lived here from 1881 onwards, and it was the first house in Mill Road. It's actually a road I'm very familiar with because I've walked up here hundreds of times as a small boy. And we'll take a quick look down this actual street, because these houses are very old. And our next stop from that corner house just over there on Mill Road is Church Street, which is where Samuel Dennis actually lived, and he lived the first house along from the actual church, so next to St Mary the Virgin Church here down in Maldon, and we're just coming up to that now. And here's a little view of Church Street. Many of Lydia's last children were actually baptised in St Mary the Virgin. It would have been a church that she was very familiar with. Certainly some very old and some very stunning houses along this little stretch of road, and just there on the corner the cream coloured house, I would presume that would be the actual house where Samuel Dennis actually resided, around the same time where that Lydia would have met him. He was working as a butcher at the time, and in later life as a builder. Now there is a bed and breakfast down here, the Jolly Sailor, but that would have been a public house in that period too, and I'm pretty sure Lydia drank there. And we've got a great view here of the Jolly Sailor pub, with the church just behind. Okay, we're just going to take a head up to St Mary the Virgin Church and take a closer look at that beautiful church. Now sadly Lydia wasn't actually buried there. Her burial isn't recorded at all, but I will tell you a little bit more about that a bit later on in the video. Okay, we're going to actually head to Wants Road now. We're going to leave this stunning church behind. So this is St Mary the Virgin Church in Maldon, where Lydia Mumford certainly would have worshipped every Sunday, and where 2 of her children were baptised. I mentioned a little bit earlier that Lydia sadly wasn't actually buried in this particular church, and this probably is where she should have been. There's a little bit of a sinister tale and a little bit of a very sad end to her life, and I'm definitely going to be sharing that with you when I reach that particular location. It's kind of where the story concludes and ends. But ends in a very sad way. Okay everyone, I'm going to take you up to Wants Road now, and let's take a little look at that very old street. It was built in the 19th century, and Lydia lived there in the 1870s, which was the first location she resided in when she moved here to Maldon from Bocking and Braintree. So let's go there now. Okay, we're just actually walking up Wants Chase, which leads us into the main thoroughfare, into Wants Road. And just over there is the Plume School, which is a very old school here in Malden, and my father actually attended this particular school. So we're just coming into Wants Road now. We need to find the Star Inn, which was a pub, and it was here in the 1870s. Now sadly I don't think Lydia's house actually exists anymore from that period, because these houses along this stretch are actually quite modern. So these houses would have replaced where Lydia would have lived, but she certainly would have lived just around this area here, just where you can see those few houses there. And the original houses start a bit further up. There was no house numbers on the 1871 census, but I do know that she lived 19 houses away from the Star pub. Sadly, they've all been replaced by new builds. But never mind, we have the correct location of where she resided in the 1870s, and this is certainly a street she would have walked down and would have known very well. Okay, I'm actually just heading down to my last location, which is St Peter's Hospital, which is in Spittal Road, Malden. It's actually the location where Lydia passed away on the 22nd of July 1888, and she died from softening of the brain, of which she suffered for 2 years, so she most likely had dementia, or went a bit mad. So here we have St Peter's Hospital, which would have been the workhouse in the 1880s. Certainly a very impressive, very old building. And the chapel. So certainly would have been a lot deaf here. There's a perfect little bench over here, so I'm actually going to go and take a sit down just over here and have some lunch, I think. Now, this particular hospital, St Peter's, has actually got, I've actually got a few connections with this place, Lydia being one of them. But my sister was actually born here in 1975, and my stepfather passed away sadly 10 years ago on the 15th of April 2011, and he died here. And that's the same with Lydia. So Lydia passing away on the 22nd of April 1888 from softening of the brain. Now sadly, she had lost contact with all of her family. I think she had lost the will to live. I think she had lost all of her sensible mindset. In those last 2 years of her life, she really did go crazy. and no one came. No one came, no one in her family signed her death certificate. It was the governor, the warden of Malden Workhouse. And as a result, she didn't even get a burial. Now in the 19th century, bodies unclaimed were often sold by workhouses and prisons and sold for dissection. And I'm very convinced that's what happened to Lydia. Very end of her life. I find that very sad. Now I've actually got some flowers for Lydia. I don't really have anywhere to leave them for her because there is no grave. There's just this place here. This being the last place she would have known for the last 2 years of her life. So I guess I have to leave them here. And I've got the flowers just here beside me. And I think I might leave them here. So for Lydia Mumford, my 3 times great-grandmother. Well everybody, a big thank you for joining me on this episode regarding the Mayhew girls. I really hope you've enjoyed what I've put together for you all. It's certainly a story that has touched me very deeply for a long time. And stay safe, keep well, and I will see you all soon. Bye for now.